I will begin this morning's message with a story that I read many years ago, and I'm sure that I have told this before. You know, I'm very much like my dad. Oftentimes, when I hear my dad all my life preaching, and he'll tell stories, and you say to yourself, I heard this before. So we have some preacher kids here, okay? So I'm sure you know. So I'm going to tell it anyhow, because I think it illustrates the challenges of reading God's Word. There was a Baptist deacon. I mean, if we have any Baptists here, I hope that you will forgive me, okay? We can call them Methodists, but I like to pick on Baptists, okay? The Baptist deacon, and he was driving along the road, and he was stopped by the local police. And of course, the policeman asked him to roll down his window, and then asked for his license and normal procedures. And this policeman noticed there's an empty bottle on the floor. And so the officers said to him, "Sir, have you been drinking?" And of course, the deacon replies, No, not really. "Then why do I smell alcohol on your breath?" asked the policeman. And then he didn't say much, and he says, "I see the empty bottle there." And then the deacon, being a deacon, very much Bible taught, he knows the stories in the New Testament, particularly the first miracle recorded in the Gospel of John. And this deacon immediately, without pause, raised his hand and says, "Praise the Lord, he has done it again." Okay. Well, when I come through this story, I always said, if all Christians can be that shrewd and all Christians can be that responsive during crisis time and pick out a Bible verse or pick out a narrative and just juxtapose into the situation and hoping that God will do his miracle, changing whiskey, wine to water, okay? Reverse miracle. But that's not how Bible narratives should be interpreted. There is a misconception by many of us. And today's text, I'm going to dovetail what Pastor Dr. Hugh said last Sunday. Do you recall? He began his sermon with apology, okay? And so I feel very comfortable to do likewise. And that is to say, the passage that we are scheduled to go through in the Gospel of Luke, okay, is that you can't skip it. And chapter 16 is what we're going to look at. And in this chapter, if you have it right away, open up, you will notice we're going to cover this chapter in two parts, okay? Because Joseph is sitting there, and Joseph is very timer. He's a typical accounting, right? 1 + 1 always equals 2. I didn't tell you this. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. He had a little laptop. And it was like 10:32. I was 2 minutes past 10:30. He had that laptop with a big time clock number, 10:32. And he put it out the window and he waved it, okay? But he is among the audience today, so he won't be doing that. But we have brothers in the background. They will always remind me. They raise the arm or they do this, whatnot, okay? So we need to be quick about the whole thing. But the point is that if we can't do this whole chapter, but we must look at the whole chapter as one single narrative. John MacArthur, in his study Bible, treated as such. Far be it for me to do any differently. But if you look at this, it's a long narrative. And this narrative has three characters, three groups, okay? Have I not? Oh, yes. There are three groups, okay? You have the disciples, you have the Pharisees, and then at the end of this narrative, the center of attention is the people. If you look at the Bible very carefully, verse 1, it says the disciples. You see that? Verse 14 is the Pharisees. Verse 18 is everyone. And juxtaposed in this three groups of narrative, there's a parenthesis. Okay, parenthetical with parables, two of them actually. One, and they all, we will talk about this morning. And then the second one, you need to come back, seeing the part 2, okay? My wife and I've got her hook on some of the program that on streaming. I sinned grievously. Okay, I got caught her on one of these things, and this is 8 episodes, and each episode is about 50 to 60 minutes. I kind of talk her into trap on those things. You have to see the whole thing to understand the story, and you have to prepare yourself. So here we are. You have this 2 parables in the beginning and in the end, towards the end of this chapter. And in that 2 parables, you have these 3 groups of people that Jesus is addressed to. And so I want you to come back next Sunday, and this will be part 2 of the story. So let us begin to read just the first 13 verses of this. You have your Bible, or if not, you can read it with me on the screen. Jesus, will you begin with me. Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." So he was canned, isn't he? Right? He's getting the pink slip. Verse 3. The manager said to him, "What shall I do now? My master," said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their house." So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" And the debtor says, 900 gallons of olive oil. He replied, the manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. That's 50% discount, isn't that, right? Verse 7. Then he asked the second debtor, "And how much do you owe?" And he says, 1,000 bushels of wheat. He told him, "Take your bills and make it 800. Verse 8. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much." Verse 11. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. May the Lord bless the reading of his holy word. You will notice that this is a very interesting, perplexing text. Okay, there are several places that it is very hard to, it's like a puzzle. If you know those puzzles, they have these 4 corners. And sometimes in desperation, you can force it to match, right? You can force it, and if nobody's watching, you take a hammer and you pound it, and there you have it, right? Blue's not blue. But you will find a mistake in the end, or maybe towards the middle, you will find pieces that should go in there that you have. I mean, regardless, whatever it is, that this chapter is full of a trap for us to understand. Because the question that I need to ask is that who is the master in this case? If the master is reference to Jesus, then we have a problem here, isn't there? Because then is Jesus telling us that it's okay to do unrighteous things? Is it okay to take your boss's ledger and just cut it in half and so make some friends because the debtor, you have given him a 50% discount? And the question in here is that we need to see is that where does this parable end? So if I may, I'm going to ask you to think of this, is that the master commended the dishonest manager because he had actually I am going to say that this is the end of the parable. Now, if you think differently, now this is the NIV translation, okay? And so many other translations is a comma, isn't it? Right? It's a continuation. But the way I look at this, and I'm not alone. I've searched all over, and I like to think that this is the end of it. And when I say the end of this, then what comes after is the teaching that Jesus began. So if you will forgive me, if you disagree, which is fine. I know some of you with the ESV translation and other translation is a comma, okay? It's a continuation. But I think, and I agree with many scholars, that if you put a period here, which is possible in translation, by the way, the original text, if you put a period there, it seems like it would be. I will address that a little later in our discussions here. But whatever it is, the subject has to do with wealth. So I have borrowed this title, okay, from a person who we don't know well, but I love this. He says the title is Trust in Wealth versus Wealth in Trust. The subject becomes object, the object becomes subject. But the issue here is wealth. The issue here deals with money, deals with things that we all know. How much? What is it? End of the ledger. So not only is it talk about the trust that we have in wealth, it also says that the trust itself, there is wealth. That is to say, there is amount of it. So if you follow me and just give me a break here. Allow me to share with you what I have learned. And I hope that not necessarily that you agree with my period at the end of verse 8, at the beginning, part of verse 8, but that you will see that there is a message for all of us in the subject of wealth. So let's begin. I ask you to look at the beginning. You will notice that there's the word manager. The Greek word here at other places is translated as slave. And we'll talk about this a little later. But what we need to understand is that in the society, in American society, when we talk about slavery, we only can think about the slavery issue that is American history, right? But in the Mediterranean, in the first century, when Jesus was preaching, and prior to that, Hebraic culture, a slave is not the kind of slave that we understand from our history. In the Hebrew culture, a slave, often, if you have your Bible, well, you don't have to write it down, okay? It's Leviticus chapter 25, verse 40. That whole chapter basically deals with how should the slave owner treat the slave? And verse 40 says this, I will read it. He shall be with you as a hired, he is a slave. He shall be with you as a hired man, as he were a sojourner, which means a traveler, a visitor, a person on pilgrimage. He shall serve with you until the year of Jubilee. Now, what is the year of Jubilee? In the Hebrew year, Jubilee is every what? Every 5 years or 7 years? That all debt is settled, okay? With an election coming up, we have a Democratic candidate says, all student loans should be canceled. Year of Jubilee. That's what that is, okay? The year of Jubilee. So in that sense, in the Hebrew culture, just a snippet, now this whole chapter deals with it just about, but that verse itself tells you the picture is that the Hebrew culture did not treat a slave like that slavery that is recorded in our history book. Okay, you catch it. That's the gist of it. That is to say, the slave oftentimes, okay, can hold professional function. In fact, some of them actually do it in medicine, in education. They do a business administration. So therefore, it is appropriate in this portion of our narrative that we translated the word in other places oftentimes becomes slave, is that he's a manager. But whatever it is, he is to answer the owner, the boss, right? The owner. So what we need to understand is that he could be a steward in a sense. He has to be faithful with his boss's money, his wealth, his property. That's what he is called to do. And so the question here is that he was cooking the books, wasn't he? Now, you go back and Google, you will find many scholars, you will have several interpretations of this. Some scholars think, oh, this manager is nice because the boss is charging usury, and that's against the biblical teaching. And so this man is a good man. He's actually cutting out the interest rate. You see what I'm talking about? But that nowhere it says that. I don't know how they get this. And so the issue here for us is that we know that he was cooking the books. And Jesus telling this parable. And Jesus says that the natural response of this man is, what shall I do? Right? When it comes to money, which money is numbers. We have several young people here are majoring in accounting. Okay, now I was a humanity major. I know you're going to laugh at this. I have a minor in drama. So I was far end of the humanity. I majored in American history, humanity course. But many of the people here are mathematicians. Accounting, your number, 1 + 1 is 2. Everything has to be balanced. But the issue here, this guy manager says, what should I do? And he immediately had what I call the eureka moment. You guys remember your world history, a guy named Archimedes? Raise your hand if you know. Geniuses. Archimedes was the guy supposedly taking a bath. This is back in prehistorical time, right? Remember the legend? He was taking a bath. And doing his bathing, he discovered the principle of buoyancy. Buoyancy, okay? Which eventually becomes volume, right? Those you people have physics. And so the story has it, he was taking a bath and he saw this thing bouncing, rubber ducky, whatever it is. And the word he used in Latin was eureka, which in English means what? Come on, you guys. I found it. I got it. So in that sense, if you look at this narrative, this slave, this steward, this manager, he was caught cooking the books, isn't it? Right? And he was fired. He would never find a decent job again. But immediately, he says what? Say it with me. Ready? Come on, you guys, ready? Eureka! Why am I paying attention to this? Is that human nature, we all know what that means, the eureka moments. When we are caught red-handed. American has a saying what? Your hand caught in the cookie jar, isn't it? Richard Nixon, okay, the Watergate. He kept saying there's no tape, there's no evidence. And they found tape. And that tape had his voice saying, yes, don't tell the whole thing. Don't tell them that we did this at Watergate. Once they found that tape, within weeks, Nixon resigned from the presidency. Because why is it? Human nature is that when we do things, right? Human nature, we have a eureka moment. Adam, why did you take this fruit, the forbidden fruit? Oh, my wife told me to do this. Right? We have a tendency to do that. And so he says, what did he say immediately? He says, I know what I should do. The trust in wealth and wealth in trust is such a, to me, that we cannot plead ignorance. By nature, we can come up with things that we can say to save us. We have this gifted entrepreneurship in us. This idea of high hopes. When I was growing up, there was a song in a musical The musical song is called High Hopes, and the words are something like this. Once there was a little old ram, thought he could make a hole in that dam. No one can make that ram scram, so he keep ramming that dam, for he has high hopes. There it is. High hope. Yes, Rebecca is singing behind, so it tells you how old she is, okay? But this, we do. We have that. We think that nobody's watching, is it? We think cut a little bit corners. We think if we can change 8 into 9, it's okay. We think that if we put 2 3s back to back, it becomes 8. I have students. I don't give true and false tests anyway, but once in a while, when I'm in a hurry, I will make up true and false tests. And I have students make the T, not quite like T, just in case that they were wrong. They say, oh, Mr. Shen, this is really an F. I just forgot to put this one out. Well, come on. Young people, when we come to wealth, when we come to money, the trust that we have in the wealth and the wealth of ability for us to increase our trust gets us in all kinds of trouble. So what did he say? This is what I will do. He says, I will take this and make it this. I will take this and make it this. Now, I don't know whether you guys know anything about olive oil. If you go buy olive oil, the high quality it's very expensive. You go to Costco, buy the ordinary olive oil, it's already 2 gallons of it is something like $28. Think in terms of, that's why, by the way, I choose NIV because they are the only translation that I can find that actually translated into that modern 900 gallons of olive oil. 1,000 bushels of wheat. So the numbers that we deal with, I want you to see that. And so what does he do? He cooked the book, and he says, I'm going to fix this. So should we be shocked of what USC did with people trying to get into the school? Should we be shocked what even the president can do? You know, I'm not saying I'm pro-Trump, but all you have to go back is the administration of Ronald Reagan. He was in trouble. All you have to do, John Kennedy was sleeping with Marilyn Monroe. President Eisenhower had an affair. And he was going to marry this woman. And he became president. FDR had a mistress. And you go back and back, they were all human. Cooking books. So when we find someone cooking books, we should say, welcome to the world. Isn't it? Because not only we trust in the wealth, we have wealth of ways to boost our trust. We cut corners. We have somebody help us changing numbers. So that's a lesson I want you to learn. I've learned this. And I have to tell you, I am not above that. In fact, when I was preparing for this sermon, and I just wrote this, I said, here's an irony. Our coins, our bills, has 3 words in it. Do you guys know what words are? In God we trust. When you think about it, how ironical. I think this whole thing was printed during Eisenhower's as a president. We didn't have that in our coins. So President Eisenhower, during that period of time in America, was still very much into this Judeo-Christian model. So they passed a law that says all coins and all paper money, in God we trust. So, my dear friends, I'm asking you this morning, who do we trust? And how much trust should we have? I am not anti-wealth. I love money just like you, because money speaks. I got my first teaching contract. I had $200 in my pocket. I was barely 21 years old. Never had a car that's worth anything. I bought a brand new 65 Chevy. I have told you that. I even showed you a picture of it, isn't it? And my collateral was my $200 with my teaching contract showing them I'm making so much, how much I was making this year. Why? Because I thought that new car will make me a new man. Who doesn't like wealth? So it's not wealth that is bad. It's the issue is trust, isn't it? The issue is trust. Oh, he's not done. Jesus is not done. So we come to the next part, okay? The next part is that I want you to know that this is a tricky part of it, is that verse 8. I've decided, I am convinced, okay? I could be wrong. Is that the period should be end right there. That is to say, the parable ends when Jesus says, the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. Everything after that, I believe, is a teaching that Jesus makes. So this is the end of the story. And I have come, when my study, I come to this and I say, I'm going to write this down. I'm going to show it to you people. This guy says there is all the differences in the world between I applaud the dishonest steward because he acted cleverly, and I applaud the clever steward because he acted dishonestly. They are not the same. They're in fact completely opposite. Jesus is not applauding this wrongful act. What the parable here says, that he is a dishonest person, but he acts cleverly. We are all sinners in the sight of God. Right? We are all sinners in the sight of God. The issue here is how we respond to that. Now, just to a sidebar. You guys know what a sidebar is, right? A sidebar means that in the middle of an issue, you say, let's time out something else we need to talk about. So time out. Sidebar over here. I just want you to know, in the Old Testament, in our Bible, Holy Book, there's a story of Tamar and Judah, right? The father-in-law, daughter-in-law, how he impregnated the daughter-in-law to have a son, and he tried to lie about it. Manipulating. There's a story of Rahab, who was a harlot, who became the linchpin, isn't it, for the Israelites' victory in conquering Jericho. There is a story of Abraham and Pharaoh. This is in chapter 12 of Genesis, the very beginning of recorded history of Abraham. Chapter 12, isn't that right? God says, I will bless you. And when they met Pharaoh, Pharaoh says, well, you have a beautiful woman there. Oh, that's my sister. Because he knew that would be a plus. There's a story of Rebekah and Isaac. And if you go to the Old Testament, there's a story again and again. In the New Testament, there's a story. So in other words, the whole thing here that we need to understand about this is that the wealth exhibited, the idea is that we are all sinners in the sight of God. And that is the reason why that to me, the next part of verse 8 and verse 9 is so critical. Jesus said, this is teaching now. Jesus is teaching this. Jesus said, for the people of this world, and I like the other translation, which is the children of this age, right? I like that better, okay? It's very much talking about the end time. It's a very apocalyptic, okay? Ecclesiology at the end of time, okay? And so you say, for children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than other people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is done, you will be welcomed into the eternal dwelling. This is so tricky. Because what is Jesus saying here? Because what Jesus is saying, he is not saying it's okay to lie. Jesus is not saying it's okay to cook the books and try to save yourself. What Jesus is saying is that you have two groups of people here. Children, okay, of this age. I call it CTA, all right? Today, this lingo today, I have a lot of these. The other day, I didn't know what goat means. I thought goat is the animal, goat. You guys know what goat means? Greatest of all times, right? So from now on, you can call me goat, okay? I will not be insulted that you call me some, okay? So I'm following the modern trend. So CTA, okay? Children, okay, of this age. And then you have POL, okay? People of light. So Jesus explains this, yes, there are two groups of people here. There are people who are children, okay, of this age, and there are people of light. And then Jesus commented that these people are very shrewd. Now, this Greek word, shrewd, is very interesting. Phronemos, which is used oftentimes in the wisdom literature, which means that there's a faithful and wise. So this shrewd should not be interpreted like the way we do today, right? Today, if we call somebody a shrew, it's a kind of a disparaging word, isn't it? But in the wisdom literature, that word shrewd often means that the person has acted wisely. So what we're saying, the shrewdness here is to be praised. And so what I believe what Jesus is saying is that the people, the children, okay, of this age have a tendency to think that of their piety, that they don't have nothing can be learned from the people of light has nothing can be learned from the CTA, the children of the age. That is to say, we do not believe that we can learn anything from people who are not believers. We cannot learn anything from, say, for example, Bill Gates. We cannot learn anything from Stephen Jobs. And I beg the difference. Now, if you disagree with me, let me know. We can have some conversation. But since I have the pulpit, I'll share with you what God has spoken to me. And for that reason, I believe that's what Jesus says in verse 9. I believe in part of the verse 8. Jesus saying, you can learn. Don't be so arrogant thinking that you are the children of light. That you're people of light. You have nothing to learn from the world. Young people, I am a true believer that you ought to read what's going on in this world. You need to know not only the politics of the thing, economic issues, social issue. There's nothing wrong with fashion. Know what the fashion is. I'm asking you today, if I have time, I would love to have you list me. What do you think the people is reading, books, novel they're reading, the top? Can you name me the top books? 5 books? Yeah. I'm not saying you should read the book, but you should understand. That's what I believe the teaching that I've gotten. He said, when you talk about wealth, trust, wealth, I believe that we have enormous capacity to absorb things that will help us to live in this world that we live in. Rather than saying, oh, this is the non-believer. We don't want to learn anything from this guy. He's an atheist. I'm saying that there are things out there that you ought to take a look at. But there's a key, there's a caveat. Notice what Jesus says at the end. You will be welcome, right? You see that? And I believe what Jesus is saying is that even though Jesus says you need to know, okay, children of the age, you need to know what they're writing. You need to know the fashion. You need to know what's going on politically. But in the end, there's a caveat. The chasm between CTA and POL is eternal on the eternal issue. You understand? This is where I disagree with my Mennonite believers, the Hutterized believers. I disagree with that. They want to cloister in their community, be sheltered from all the world, and thinking that is I bless them, they live that way. For me, I think you should go out there, okay? I believe, young people, you should know at least what the world is doing out there. Do not judge by their sinfulness and saying, I have nothing to learn from them. You can learn something from them. You can. And I believe that's what but be careful. The caveat is that the distance, the chasm between the CTA and the POL is eternal. And that's the reason why young people, you need to begin each day with asking God to shield you. Not from the worldly things, to see you in that fact that you know there's a wealth of things out there that you should read. But that you will not be influenced by it. Because where your trust lies, which is the end of my message. But I hope you're already catching it. I do not believe you should live in a kind of a hermit. Your piety is very good. I am so glad that so many of you, by the way you live, your lifestyle, I pray for you. And I'm admonishing you to continue to do this way. And I'm saying you are a good witness, but also make sure by doing that you are not shield yourself from what you can learn from the children of this age. Right? There is a document, I think it's on Netflix, on Bill Gates. I watched it. If you have a chance, you should see it. You should see his lifestyle. He's not a believer. He does not believe in eternity. But if you read his biography, if you watch the document, you can pick up a lot of good things. A lot of things we can learn from him. That's just one example. There are others. There are others. Okay, let's go on then. Jesus continued to teach us in verse 10. I want you to, if you have your Bible, look at these words. Little, much. Little, much. Again, Jesus is talking about trust. Okay? You trust with a little can be trusted with much. If you dishonest with very little, you will be dishonest with much. This is a typical Hebraic writing style. This opposite thing going on. And then you will notice in verse 11 and 12 how many times that the word trust is mentioned. So what Jesus is saying here to me was that it's very much accountable. That is to say, trust is not something that is nebulous. It's not something that's a cloud in the air. It's not vapor. It is little versus much. That's it. It is accountable. And then Jesus says something in verse 13, which he makes his statement. He says, no one can serve two masters. So that means multitasking is out of the picture, isn't it? Right? It's out of the picture. You cannot serve two masters. You cannot say, well, I can do this and I can also do this if they are completely opposite each other, isn't there? I'm not saying multitasking when you have 3-4 monitors and that's not the analogy I'm trying to make here. I believe what Jesus is saying is that every one of us, our loyalty can only lie in one area, in one person. Either Mammoth or God. By the way, it's very interesting. That word we translate to Mammoth comes from the Hebrew word and has the beginning of Amen. A-M-E-N. That's very interesting. I'm always thinking that when that happens, that means, Amen means what? So be it, isn't it? Right? So the issue here is that you cannot serve two. And the severity of it is tied into the word hate, love, devoted, and what? Despise. It is ultimate. It's an ultimatum. There is nothing, it's extreme ends, the ultimacy of choice at hand. This is This is the devil's trap. The devil's trap, it says, it's okay to mingle a little bit. It's okay not to grab that. That's too extreme. Young people, Jesus said, either you hate or you love. Either you devoted or you despise. And that the Greek word, the devoted, has a feeling, the idea of holding fast, forge a very strong attachment. That's devotion. I see some of you people, sometime with your cell phone, you're playing video games. And I don't mean to, this is not disparaging to you. I don't mean this at all. But I do wish I see that and I'm saying to myself, wow, that's dedication. All the noise and the coffee, people talking, and you, how did you shut this off? How can you play this game well? Assuming you want to win with all the noise. And what even more amazing is there's a button that you can stop. I think, right? Because you actually stop and you blah, 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 blah. And when that comes in, you pick it up where you left off. And I'm amazed. I say, I'm envy of your technology knowledge. But what I'm saying to you is that the world is trying to influence you, young people, that you can multitask different masters. Jesus says you cannot serve both God and money. I leave you with these thoughts, and I copied it. This man said this. Most of us, read it with me, okay? Most of us will not this week christen a ship, write a book, end a war, appoint a cabinet, dine with the queen, convert a nation, or be buried at the stake, burned at the stake. More likely, the week will present no more than a chance to give a cup of water, that should be water, write a note, visit a nursing home, vote for a county commission, teach a Sunday school class, share a meal, tell a child a story, go to choir practice, feed the neighbor's cat. Jesus says, whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. That should be our model for daily living. You catch the drift? The little, the much. So the issue here today is the title. And we will continue because Jesus is not done. Jesus has only covered the one of the three groups, which is the disciples. We are his disciples, are we not? When you come back next Sunday, we're not going to streaming, okay? Part 2. We will cover the Pharisees, and we will cover that wonderful, wonderful narrative. Very difficult narratives of Abraham, okay? And the rich man and the poor man, okay? May God bless you as you walk in the Lord. That you know your trust in wealth should be limited, knowing that it is not the end. But you have a wealth of ability God has given you. God has given you the wealth of wisdom and truth written in his holy text. God has given you a family of God, yes, as your part members. Do you know that all the years I've been here, 5 years now, only once somebody has wrote me an email? Now, please, don't all of a sudden write me emails. I'm just saying, we're not connected, you see what I'm talking about? That's part of that wealth, okay? You have loving parents. When's the last time you sit down and you share your heart, your spiritual walk, your challenges? Balance you out with your mom and dad, with pastors, okay? So trust in wealth. Number is important, right? Number is still important. Balancing the checkbook is still important. Get your sleep, it's important. Do your homework. Do your science project. And do it well. You need to trust it because you do well, you will get paid. You get promotions. There's nothing wrong with that. But you also, most important, is the wealth that God has given you, your ability, opportunity, and you put that trust in him. Let us pray.